Hello and welcome to the NeuroNoodle Network Podcast News and Notes Edition. I'm Pete Jansons, and alongside me will be Anthony Ramos. He's a passionate enthusiast and connoisseur of technology content in the realms of mental health and well-being. In our show, we delve into the latest news, innovative research, and emerging trends in neuroscience and mental health. Anthony brings a fresh perspective as a dedicated follower and fan, sharing insights and reflections on our past NeuroNoodle podcast episodes, as well as his take on the latest developments in the field. Whether you're a professional, a student, or simply someone fascinated by mental health and neuroscience, join us as we explore these topics in a format that's informative, engaging, and accessible to all. So without further ado, let's dive into what's new and noteworthy in the world of mental health and neuroscience and just plain old technology. Let's hear Anthony's thoughts on our previous discussions and current trends. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Mark your calendars for Friday, April 26, 2024, as Bradley University hosts the 8th Annual Super Brain Summit, presented by the Center for Collaborative Brain Research. This year's topic, Rhythms of Regulation, Polyvagal Perspectives, promises an insightful exploration to polyvagal theory with Deb Dana, LCSW, leading the discussions as a featured speaker. Dana is a celebrated author and clinician, brings her extensive knowledge and practical experience to the forefront. The event will be held at the Hayden Clark Alumni Center's Peplo Pavilion, available both live and online, ensuring accessible participation for all interested. For those looking to register or seeking more information, please contact Gwen at GHOWARTER@bradley.edu or by phone at 309-677-3900. Further inquiries about the program can be directed to Dr. Loy Russell Chapin at lar@bradley.edu. Don't miss this enriching opportunity to engage with the latest advancements in brain research and polyvagal practices. News and notes, what do you got?
Yeah, I have a lot. Well, did you guys see, I don't know if you want to start with something funny, but I did see how, did you see how Jason Kelce showed up at the Super Bowl the other day? I'll screen share, but I actually had a cool encounter during the Super Bowl. So this is how he showed up, apparently. So I don't know if you can see that, like the guy from Hangover. But
love that show. Love him.
Yeah. And I guess somebody asked me who won. I said Taylor Swift won. So there you go. But it was a good day yesterday. I actually we talked about neuroscience for most of my Super Bowl.
Really?
I happened to meet through a friend a UF neurologist who, as you know, are the one type of doctor who uses EEG. And so I was able to talk with her a lot. And kind of the first thing I wanted to address with her is, why aren't we using this for more things?
Yeah.
And she was a very cool person, I want to say, if she ends up listening to this. Really appreciated talking to her. And one of the things she said that epileptologists in different parts of the country are trained differently. And so she says, if you get a report back from an epileptologist, because an epileptologist is a neurologist with a special certificate that takes like 1 to 2 years more of training, let's say. Those are those EEG fellows that my other doctor friend was talking about.
Yeah.
They, she says, because they're trained differently in different parts of the country, you'll get a different result back, depending who you talk to. And she says, you don't know how to trust it. And so, I would love to hear what Jay says about something like that. As I'm sure you probably would. I would guess that maybe the training could be more standardized. But I think that maybe our treatment could be a little more standardized. I'm always nervous about recommending neurofeedback to friends in different parts of the country that I don't know someone like you guys, because I don't know what kind of training they're going to get. There's probably lots of approaches that work. I want to be clear, or that can benefit people.
Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah. What's that?
Well, the two things that I bring up with Jay is, number one,
Yes.
once AI figures out how to deal with the artifacts, and
Yeah.
once we get this regulated, licensing, because anybody can put up a shingle and buy an amplifier and say, that's an artifact. This is this. You should do that.
Hmm.
That's a problem.
Yeah, I guess we don't have, um,
Standardization,
I
like you
guess
said.
doctors have that barrier to entry of many years, and we don't quite have that yet.
I know every brain is different, okay, but you can have something that's, why the BCIA, I would think they would be a louder voice in all of this to say, well, I'm accredited, with them and get more people to buy in. And it's a shame your friend is saying that
Yeah,
yeah, it's good stuff, but we're only using it for epileptics.
yeah, and doctors joke about the neurologist, and she
Yeah,
she fessed up to this. The favorite joke of neurology or doctors is, I don't like calls from neurology. When they call, they just say metabolic encephalopathy and they hang up. And the doctor's like, I have no clue what that means. That doesn't tell me anything. So I'm guessing the neurologist would like more tools to do their job. And so it is a little bit puzzling. I talked to my close MD friend after we spoke last podcast,
yeah,
um, and he too is a little puzzled. He said, it's interesting that we don't use EEG more, considering that we do use it for one thing. So it already has, in a way, like a foot in the door. And
yeah,
he says, I just don't, he's like, I don't quite understand. He's like, I feel like it must be a culture thing. He says it's so different from most of the things we do. And maybe I was discussing with the girl yesterday, the neurologist, that maybe it feels a little bit woo to people, like not fully based in reality or something, but we know it is. And I talked with her and she was actually very receptive to all the other things it can diagnose in mental health, like the epileptic discharges. And I was really glad this was the last thing from talking with her. I told her about the 40 hertz stimuli that we talked about last time, where they flash like a light or play a sound at
yeah.
40 hertz speeds. And about a little while later, she says to me, after I'm continuing to talk about neurofeedback, she goes, a colleague of mine, or I think maybe her boss or something, her attending said, um, hey, there's this new thing called Cognito Therapeutics. I was like, what's that? She goes, it's something like gamma stimulation. I was like, that's 40 hertz. That's what I was telling you about. And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, I'm gonna look it up. And I look up the company. And sure enough, the founder of the company is Lee Wei Tsai, the exact doctor, MIT doctor I told you guys about last time, and that I had already told her about. And so I said, I'm so glad that you brought this up because now I'm not too on the fringe here. If your own colleagues are kind of bringing up with you some of this stuff, I did like that she knew one last thing. She knew about the sleep spindle, which makes sense. That's what we train when we train SMR training. But obviously she didn't know that it can be trained and improved. But she was receptive. I'm gonna go ahead and email her some of the research Jay points out on
Yeah.
epilepsy, like his case study with Isabel. So trying to get our word out however we can. So
We're trying to pick up chemical energy, right? Like in
Mhm.
your heart, you get an EKG, right?
Yeah.
Do people believe in that? And so they don't believe that there's chemical energy in the brain, and if it's different in certain places, they don't buy into that there's going to be differences or outcomes. I
Yeah.
or get a baseline. Like I said last time, you get a physical, right?
Hmm.
EKG, blood pressure, all that stuff, and nobody's looking at the noodle.
Exactly. My MD friend said the same thing as Jay. Interestingly, he'd never heard Jay say this, but somehow he said, "Yeah, it's like when you go to the cardiologist, you might just have heartburn, or you might have, a horrible heart issue, and he doesn't know until he does a test."
Yeah,
And uh, the difference is that the medical community doesn't yet sort of acknowledge the validity of our test, is
yeah,
basically,
yeah,
unfortunately. But we're going to get there. And you know what I did let her know is I let her know that fMRI is not as valid as they think. And I told her about the dead salmon experiment that Jay talks about. And I told her about there's a Duke meta study of like 57 studies. I have it here if anybody ever needs it. But basically, it says if you put the same person in fMRI twice, you'll get a different result both times. It's just not. I mean, and there's a chain I have on Twitter that I saved. It's academics who are basically as angry as we are, saying man, whoever's using fMRI, they just need to like just stop what you're doing because there's no validity to it. So anyway, it might just take some people becoming knowledgeable or someone like Jay or people like
Yeah,
us
yeah,
just
yeah.
trying to clue these people in. So one
Well,
at a time, maybe
what you
might
got to
be how
keep
we do
talking
it.
about so Google picks us up. Did you see in the Washington
There you go.
Post today they had a number 55% of
Okay.
people that get talk therapy do it online.
Interesting. Okay. Did they say that was good or bad, or how do you feel about that?
Well, it
Yeah.
depends. If I had a license on the wall, I
Yeah.
because because of the pandemic,
Hmm.
now that it's over, people are doing the face to face, and
Yeah.
look, it's whatever works. If it's working,
Yeah.
great. If it's not, then don't. You know,
I know a lot of clinicians in our field have utilized that to do at-home care, at-home training over Zoom or what have you. They send you home with the hardware.
yeah, yeah,
But even that sometimes can be a little bit dangerous in the sense, there's a company that I've used before that I think that there's some value to their product. It's called Myndlift. A lot of people have heard of it. Therapists can use it on their own to send with their client home, but they also have this service that you can subscribe to, and you get connected to a therapist of theirs. And one of the concerns I have, and I've known a lot of people that have used it now, and you can talk to them. A lot of them post on places like Reddit, that if you tell them you have anxiety, they're going to raise frontal alpha. And
yeah.
if you know the phenotypes, or if you listen to Jay, you know that frontal alpha is associated with ADHD. It's associated with dementia, even, um, and even things like depression and OCD. Why would they be doing that? And I think it has to do, just a little note for your listeners. My theory is it has to do with the phenomenon of rebounding or compensation. So when you train in the wrong direction, there might be, and I think I've observed with some folks, that you rebound in the right one temporarily. So for after that session, people will report to me raising alpha feels good, but may not be good long term. And there are cases, because this is one of the things I wanted to talk about. I've spoken to people myself multiple times, probably like once a week. The story is this: my therapist has been raising my frontal alpha, and it felt great at first, was helping me. And now, after about the fourth or fifth time, all it does is cause anxiety and depression. And now, the worst part, one guy, he's in a university trial of neurofeedback. He says they were raising my alpha. Now they can't get it to go back down. When I say can't, he says I get lots of side effects when they try to turn it back down. So he now is, who knows, potentially stuck in this state. And so I'm bringing that up, and I probably have more to say to that another day. But it does concern me when people are not using research-backed methods, or something like Jay's phenotype method. Um, anyway, so wanted to go there with regard to standard of care and like the variation. We don't have a standard of care yet. So,
Hmm. What's next on your list, Anthony? Been waiting a
so I
long
wanted
time to see this list.
Yeah, I've got a lot of different topics. I sliced it up several ways,
Okay.
but basically if you have a topic you want to hear about, you can shout it out. I basically have some of my craziest articles on a variety of topics today.
Okay.
So I can pick, or we can, you
Oh,
can
go
let me.
right ahead. Throw them up. That was my one.
Yeah. So just with respect to what we were talking about last week about trauma and addiction are correlated. I'm going to share again because I got a study
Yeah, go
here
ahead.
that shows a theory of mine, well, seems to validate a theory of mine as to why they might be correlated. So there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. This one's on effects of childhood adversity on smartphone addiction, multiple mediation of life history. So what is this about? So last week I told you guys that trauma is a 4,600% risk factor according to Kaiser Permanente and the CDC for addiction. So if you suffered early life trauma or you have PTSD, it's a lot more likely that you will have problems with addiction at some point in your life. And I try to, give my opinion as to why I said, there are brain changes that happen. Trauma can be, it's almost like a physiological insult to your brain in terms of inflammation. And a study this past week did come out and said that PTSD is associated with gene changes in the brain. And as we know, if the genetics change, the cells change, and the physiology may change what's going on in there. But I had an idea. I was thinking, okay, so if trauma is associated with addiction, addiction is associated with shorter term preference. Your preference for instant gratification would be a good way. That's one way to think of addiction. We know this cigarette or this beer may hurt us, but we want it right now. We'll worry about the long term later. And I also thought about how we talked about how both Jay and the addiction MD I mentioned, Howard Wetzman, talk about how addiction and ADHD are correlated. So I was like, okay, so you have these people who they've been traumatized. So now they have a short-term preference. They're thinking short-term and they have trouble paying attention. They're more impulsive. I was like, what would explain that? And I remembered a friend of mine, she's a UF psychology researcher. And she mentioned that there's these things in psychology called a short life strategy. And a short life strategy, as opposed to a long life history, they call it, or slow life history, a short or fast life strategy is when you're just worried about what you can get now because you don't think there's going to be another tomorrow, or your body doesn't, or your brain doesn't. And I said that would make perfect sense to harmonize why, or at least it provides a reason as to why a traumatized person may become this short-term addict. And so looking for their short-term fix. And so I just did a little Googling on that and I came up with this study on smartphone addiction. And it's funny because they literally say risk factors of smartphone addiction, like emotional instability, insecure attachment. You had, I think her name was Dr. Ruth Cohn on here a couple weeks ago to talk about attachment. And anxiety are positively correlated with a fast life strategy. That's a direct quote from the, so they're saying smartphone addiction and fast life strategies like short-term and impulse control problems, those are all correlated. And they said they think this might be because these people who are traumatized are more eager to satisfy their need for reassurance that the smartphone affords. So they're looking to get this anxiety in a way controlled by the smartphone. And another way to say it, I think a lot of doctors will talk about dopamine because they don't use the EEG. They'll say you're trying to get that short-term hit. And in the popular news, we all know people describe Facebook and apps. It's almost like a dopamine machine. Things with Instagram. But really, we know what they're doing is they are the anterior cingulate seeking something to lock onto, and it's locking onto the phone. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it kind of, it's hard to prove theories like this that's why traumatized people become addicted, but it makes a lot of sense. I felt like all of this may come back to attachment. Dr. Cohn on your podcast a couple episodes ago,
Right.
she said that children that are not given the affection by their mother, she said frequently an avoidant mother, which I'm going to get into one day with you, things I've read about attachment. These children have a skin hunger. They're seeking contact. But another way to say it is they're seeking, this study used the word, the smartphone provides reassurance. And my addiction MD that I like, he says, I think of attachment, or so I'm sorry, I think of addiction as an attachment disorder. You're trying to replace what you didn't get, the stimuli, the stimulus. If you just think of love as a stimulus, providing dopamine and other good neurochemicals, you're trying to get it through something else as an adult because you didn't get it when you're younger. And I think you mentioned the first 5 years are crucial. I think I've heard that 80% of your brain is developed by age 3. That is kind of ridiculous. What's not developed are your executive control functions, which those are things that Jay will tell you are compromised in like 30% of addicts. That's the anterior cingulate decision making. And there's an ADHD doctor on YouTube and TikTok named Dr. Barkley, and he agrees and he says ADHD is a developmental disorder, and it corresponds to that executive function never develops fully. And he says without treatment, now he recommends drug treatment, and we think we know of a better way, obviously. But he says without treatment, they're never going to catch up because it's developmental. So they lose all that time that's normally supposed to be done through nurturing, affection, attention, even just interacting with the child, learning facial expressions. I remember that you guys too had that podcast on white noise recently, and that you may be blocking out stimuli like the phone ringing or daddy and mommy talking or what have you, that the child should be learning from. And then the last thing is in all of this smartphone stuff, and I think Mari may have said it, be
Yeah.
it smartphone, video games, any addiction, part of what may be going on is not just this may change your brain, because it may, but it might be what you're not doing. So other studies talk about if the child's playing too many games, that they are not outside playing. If they're playing video games or if they're playing on their phone, they're not socializing face to face with other kids. So I think that that might explain why we're so tempted by the phones, is because a lot of us maybe didn't get some of the interaction that we needed as children. But fortunately, you and I and Jay and others, we know a way that might help. And that's addressing the problem at the anterior cingulate. That is, the anterior cingulate is not the only phenotype that Jay talks about in addiction. He's got that ADHD medication targeting paper. The other phenotypes involve things that are more about anxiety and arousal. Um, and so, and even the beta spindles and epileptic discharges. And those require different medications, as Jay likes to talk about. But so we have a more targeted approach in a lot of times than a lot of doctors. All right, so the next thing I want to mention, it just kind of riffs on that topic that we've been talking about how addiction is an attachment disorder. And what this
Phubbing.
says is, or could be, and what this says is teens exposed to parental phubbing tend to have more sleep problems. And what this is talking about is phubbing is a phenomenon in the popular, lexicon or whatever, that
I'm not
basically,
popular.
you're funny, that I don't use it either, but it's when you ignore somebody because you're on your phone. And so, how does this connect to sleep? Well, the kids are much more. Did this study? Okay, is it study? Okay, that was it. Sharing now. I'm going to stop share.
Okay.
But the uh, the things that we're doing, it's like feeding the brain. And if you're not doing it, it's going to be it's going to change the child's development. Maybe it's just that they have more anxiety because they weren't getting that reassurance of the child, and that's why they're not sleeping.
Yeah.
But Jay likes to talk about half of ADHD may just be sleep. Some of this may be from obesity, like stuff from sleep apnea,
Hmm.
but 75% of ADHD sufferers have poor sleep. And so, according to studies that I've found, there's an 8x risk of sleep apnea among poor sleep ADHD sufferers. And anybody who has sleep apnea, including kids, they have a 95% of them have attentional deficits, which makes sense if you're not getting that deep sleep. Deep sleep, all this may compound because deep sleep, I think it was on Huberman's podcast, but there's other studies on deep sleep. It's associated with anxiety reduction. And so if you have anxiety, you're going to be less able to focus at school and at work, and even just recovering so that your attention can return. So I think it's important. And one last thing on that concept of addiction, maybe an attachment disorder, Wetzman likes to talk about. It is called the word addiction comes from a Latin word, I believe it's addicere, and what it means to give oneself over to. And he likes to say it's referring to one's attachments. And so when we can't get it through human empathy and connection, we might be trying to get it through the phone. Or anything else, the bottle, or unfortunately,
Good.
so it's kind of sad, but yeah.
Yeah.
Is there, and let me know if there's any topics you want me to dig more down into. Um,
No,
yeah,
you can almost do a screen share of your
in my notes.
Facebook uh, group and just the topics
Yeah.
that have come up, if anything comes up.
Okay. This one's about how the brain responds to reward. And what it specifically says in this study is children who are from wealthier backgrounds have lower reward sensitivity to, specifically in this study, economic, but meaning monetary incentives. But I think, Jay, you guys probably remember, I know you remember that he talks about how addiction and anterior cingulate problems are frequently a reward sensitivity issue. And what does that mean? Um, well, there's some physiology that I can get to, but basically, they're too sensitive to reward. They're seeking things, short-term fixes like the phone. And Wetzman actually talks about this other MD. If you want to think about it, because I think thinking about other models can help to almost confirm our intuitions or our data on the EEG, is that if you think of your dopamine, or right here, as the like a level, or the
Yeah.
activity is this level, and there's a baseline that you want. An addict is frequently down here, and it depends on their phenotype. The EEG phenotypes control this. But when an addict gets a little bit of dopamine or they get a stimulus, whatever it is, food, phone, drink, whatever,
Uh-huh.
they spike much higher. The average person may go to here. The addict who was below baseline goes way higher. Unfortunately, when that's done, it goes way down below baseline again. And so what happens when he's down here? The body is craving for more. It's sensitive. It's looking for that next fix. So he gets these big spikes, and that is the reward sensitivity. He's more sensitive. And so it kind of makes sense that children who are of higher socioeconomic, meaning they're wealthier families,
Yeah.
they're less sensitive to reward. Maybe it means that they're just getting more rewards. That's very possible. But it also could mean that they developed differently.
Yeah.
That in childhood, they were had blessings that maybe some of us don't get, be it financial, but also through the love and attention. They have a mom that can
Right.
spend more time with them. There's a study recently that screen time, we think of screen time as, well, maybe social media is the problem. But what they said is children who have more struggling families, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, less wealthy families, they spend several hours more on the phone per day. So the phone, while it's worth being concerned about, there's reason I think to be concerned. It also may just be a symptom of what they're not getting. So I thought this was a cool study because it kind of confirms things that Jay has said about these people are sensitive. They're too sensitive to reward.
From the corporate background, being in sales, there's just some
Okay.
people that aren't motivated by money,
Yeah.
they or risk, they
Okay.
you can either go into sales, take risk where a part of your a larger percentage of your compensation is at risk because it's dependent on a bonus. Some people want to go that way, have a higher, they want to take a risk so they can have a higher reward, or they don't want to take the risk. They go into customer service where there's a lower risk, but their money's, guaranteed. I wonder if that has a role to play in it because, the
Hmm.
old days was, first place is a Cadillac, the second place you get a set of steak knives. Some
That's
people
funny.
don't go,
Yeah. What is it? Coffee is for closers?
yeah, coffees for closers.
I love that movie. So yeah, and I've done a little bit of sales and things like that myself, and always been interested in entrepreneurship. And so
Yeah,
while you were talking, I pulled up this article.
yeah,
It says ADHD may be an asset in entrepreneurship because those people, we could conceive of it to build on your comment, they're sensitive to reward. So if you to be an entrepreneur, you got to be scrappy. Those are the guys out there scrounging for looking under the trash can, so to speak, for the value. I had
yeah,
a professor because I studied business at UF, and he said one time the entrepreneur is the guy looking at the cracks in the sidewalk, and he's looking at the stuff other people don't see. It's kind of funny because Jay talks about there's multiple patterns at the anterior cingulate, and failure modes he calls them, and that could be too much theta, beta, or alpha. And one thing I've noticed is the behavior seems a little bit different depending which one they have. And I think Jay would agree with that. For instance, I've heard Jay say that if somebody has too much alpha, and I could be wrong here, I'm paraphrasing, so Jay
yeah.
can correct me, feel free. But if they
That's
have too much alpha, he said that is similar to a condition called akinetic mutism, which is, in his words, a lack of dopamine so profound that the person cannot even speak. And this is a real disease. And I think I'm paraphrasing Jay correctly. It corresponds to too much alpha at a certain piece of that anterior cingulate. But the behavior differs when individuals that have too much theta at that anterior cingulate. It's interesting. I was picking up Dr. Barkley will talk about ADHD sufferers, and you may have heard this too colloquially, that if you have ADHD, you may be inattentive, but sometimes they can lock on. And Jay will talk about that anterior cingulate locking on. This may not be that, but it's similar. They can hyperfocus. Dr. Barkley calls it perseverate, meaning you
yeah,
persevere on the same thing. Jay, I think, has mentioned that's an inability to take yourself off. So they may look like a hard worker, and in some ways they are, but they can't take themselves off the task. And I heard that a friend of mine, he has taken, he's prescribed with ADHD medication from a young age. And he says, occasionally as an adult, I still take it to do his work. And he said, it's interesting. When you take Adderall, things like spreadsheets become very interesting. You will bury your head. He's like, all I want to do is work when I'm on that thing. Um, the Andrew Huberman of Stanford, big podcaster too, he says, if someone has motivation, it is always and everywhere a function of dopamine. And I think the phenotypes Jay talks about are probably more important than this neurotransmitter stuff.
Yeah.
But I think people are familiar with neurotransmitters, so it kind of can flesh out my argument here. And then the last thing I want to mention, have you ever heard, Pete, of the concept of flow? It's flow state.
I've heard of it. I don't know what it is, Anthony. Please tell me.
Yeah, there is a psychologist, and forgive me, it's a longer name. I think it's like an Eastern Europe. It's very long. Normally, I'm okay.
We'll put it right here.
Yeah, please do when you have it.
Yeah.
And the it's a state called flow where you are you lose sense of time. You become work becomes effortless. You have a hyper focus. There's a sense of enjoyment of what you're doing, and there's a little bit of challenge, but not so much that you can't do what you're doing. Well, I found out that theta waves are the representative of flow. And so I guess all this is building up to say, I'm finding, and others may find differently, that people that have the elevated theta waves at their anterior cingulate, as opposed to some of the other waves, that those people are the ones that hyperfocus. So when I think of the person putting their head to the grindstone, in my experience, the people with elevated theta waves are actually very good at doing that. But the danger of it, as Barkley and as Jay say, is you may not be able to pull yourself off the task. And one of the dangers that the psychologist who came up with flow talks about, he says, you can just read his quotes on the wiki. They asked him about benefits of flow. And like one of the first things he wants to talk about is the negatives, which I thought was interesting. He says, flow is only useful and needs to be looked at in the context of your integration with your family and society. So if you are too focused on your work, you're a workaholic, and you're neglecting all your other responsibilities, he says flow is not a healthy state. And it's funny because there's all sorts of internet gurus and podcasters that will talk about flow. They co-opted flow. Stephen Kotler is a big one. Maybe he would acknowledge this, I don't know, but all you hear about is flow is healing. Flow is so wonderful for my body. I got better from Lyme by surfing because of flow, is his story. But you know what? If you're always in flow and you never stop and you never sleep and you don't spend time with your family, at the end of your life, and this will come up one day when I talk about attachment theory with you, at the end of your life, they don't ask people on their deathbed, people do not say, I wish I had gotten that extra promotion.
Right.
I wish I had become CEO. The cliche, but apparently that Harvard study where they followed people for 50 years, the
Yeah.
things that made somebody happy at the end of their life were their relationships. You really, and it almost seems impossible, but you never hear people talk about my career was what made my life, wonderful or whatever. So anyway, these things, Adderall may be doing this to people. There's studies on Adderall and Ritalin that say in some ways they actually compromise your performance. They hurt your performance. The work of Ritalin users is lower quality work. The work of workaholics is they actually may be less productive in some ways because it's what they're doing, and is what they're doing what they should be doing. So anyway, wanted to talk about those waves in more detail because I've been picking up on those subtle differences in personality based on which brainwave.
Drives me crazy to think that a MD to go through residency would pride themselves on lack of sleep.
Yeah, what
Do they
was that
still do
hustle
that?
culture? Yeah, remember that? And this is now for a long time. I feel like the 2010s hustle culture was the thing, and
Yeah.
people like that will brag like, oh man, I only ever sleep 6 hours or whatever. Because
Yeah.
I definitely do.
They have a cup of coffee every 15 minutes or
Yeah.
meth or you Adderall, whatever, it's yeah, it's quantity, not quality, right?
And
Or
that can be a red ADHD sufferers apparently have a higher response to stimulants. And that may correspond to that reward sensitivity that Jay talks about. And it makes total sense. But that could be a problem. And they may be over reliant on stimulants and then it hurts their sleep. There's a recent study that caffeine can actually hurt your memory, believe it or not. Um, and it's just interesting. Here's what I was going to talk about. I feel like modern society does seem to value those states of hyperfocus. modern society seems to value the workaholic. I can't tell you, I picked up on recently, there's several times I'll hear people say, that guy, he is a piece of work, man, but I'll tell you this, he's a hard worker. You'll hear people say that about their coworker, and it's like, yeah, but is he making everybody's life miserable at the office?
Is
And
he
and
is he
could that also
selling
be a
anything?
problem? What is it?
That's the guy that makes all the phone calls, contacts everybody, but sells nothing. But he's a
Yes,
hard
thank
worker.
you. Exactly. It's like, what are they doing? We in society, and it's like we pride activity over product or value. And there's a professor that talks about this, Ian McGilchrist, at Oxford. He's a neuro psychiatrist, and he talks about the difference in the hemispheres of the brain because there are differences, believe it or not. And I think we can a lot of EEG people would embrace that. But he says we as society are viewing output as the primary value and not like it's like that Jurassic Park guy. It's like we thought so much about whether we could, we never stopped to ask whether we should. So yeah, and I think we're getting out of control on the we need to here's a good stat to back you up. I read this a long
Yeah,
time
yeah.
ago. Um, Salesmen are not promoted based on their sales figures, based on their sales. The most common, this is an actual study, the most common basis by which salesmen are promoted is their relationship with the boss. And so it would be cool if management of any company, management studies, academics would pick up on some of the psychology literature that we have and say, maybe the guy who's a workaholic is not best for my company. I'll tell you what else. And all these traits can be okay in balance. Commitment is good
Yeah.
in balance. I just want to say, but apparently workaholics get sick more often. And it actually, there's at least one study I know. Adam Grant is a guy, by the way, Wharton School of Business. He's a psychology professor, management psychology, I think, or
Mhm.
groups, something
Mhm.
like that. He says, yeah, ultimately, workaholics are less productive overall because they get sick so much. And I think it probably also is this theta stuff or this hyper focus stuff where they're always organizing instead of getting, the real stuff done. Anyway, so yeah, thanks for talking about that. I enjoyed that one.
Oh, there's more, Anthony. There's more.
Yeah, and I think you had background in sales with I should have asked earlier, but I think like with Microsoft or something. So definitely your
Oh,
experience would probably
the old,
benefit.
yeah, that was fun. That before that was when the internet was really getting going with something called Sidewalk, which would be, City Search
Okay.
or Google now.
Oh,
Um,
neat.
but it was nice to see you had two campuses, Red West and the main campus, and where you would have technology on one side and the sales on the other. And you could see right then and there that technology was running things. Now we have product-led growth where
Okay.
you build a good enough product and you give it away a part of it for free, and that'll sell it, and you don't need the salespeople anymore. I saw that happening there. And
Okay.
mentally, let's say people had trauma as they're growing up. I'm going to point to this and we'll cut. The reason why people don't do well in sales or don't
Okay.
like risk is they take everything personally. And like the entrepreneurs, like you're saying, they let it roll off of their back because they don't like rejection. You have to be able
Mm.
to hear no because you hear no quite a bit,
Hmm.
and some people take it personally, and they can have their personal self and their business self. Those people that can differentiate between the two can do well in a pay at risk environment like sales, where you're rewarded for your productivity.
I thought that's cool. Just one little note to you because I studied business and I've worked in businesses. And
Yeah.
anyway, I heard a guy sales trainer one time. He said a good salesman needs a mix of empathy and ego. He's like, there's a bunch of people, they have the empathy, but they don't have the ego to ask for the sale or to push a little bit. Then there's other guys, they have the ego, but they don't have the empathy. And that made sense to me. I felt like I'd seen that a little bit.
Well, they don't believe in what they're saying, and it's evident, or they don't
Mhm.
understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it gets back to what you're talking about at the beginning. E-
Okay.
Either they don't desire to have the reward because they've had everything, so money doesn't motivate them. Okay, to be a
Interesting. It's an
boss,
abundance. Go on.
right,
Abundance.
right, right. So it all plays into so why technology, business, mental health. I think that
Yes.
businesses could become more productive if they put somebody with an amplifier in there, neurofeedback, especially
Yes.
before maybe alpha theta trading, before a sales training session.
Brainstorm. Before what? Sales training. Okay, yeah.
Sales training, so they're in the, so they can soak it in besides, being, like,
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think there probably is room. I heard a doctor, this is the only story that's coming up with that, but there was this doctor who said, how do you take care of your kids, or how do you make sure your kids are doing well in school and doing their homework? He said, I take them running. I make sure they do their running. And I think he's getting into, we have other ways with neurofeedback, but he's getting into the physiology is controlling the decisions a lot of times. So, and you can make people more or less risk averse depending on how you train. And that might, to some level, depend on the size of activation of the brain, which one day I'd like to talk about. But yeah, I had a good, another new topic just to fire
hit
up real
me,
quick, and
hit
I'll
me.
share it for a little bit.
Yeah,
I'll share it and then we will talk about it some more. But basically, there was a really cool speaker on sleep on Andrew Huberman's podcast. This is the Andrew Huberman show, and I don't always love his show. He gets a little bit of flack because he speaks outside of his field a lot.
yeah,
But this episode was on sleep, and she's from, I believe, UCLA, Gina Poe, yes, at UCLA. And she was actually really good. She actually is probably the closest to being as good as Jay on sleep, because she actually is aware of the EEG. She talks about it. She talks about sleep spindles and other things. Now, if you listen to this woman, I like what she has to say. I'm going to tell you, but at the end, Andrew Huberman says, so listen, you've told us how the sleep spindle is important and how it helps, in PTSD, this is impacted, REM sleep, etc. So what do we do to get more stuff? And once again, I was disappointed. Do you know what her advice was? It was, well, turn off your phone a couple hours before bed and, you know, maybe just try to do some relaxation and stuff. No, I know, I mean, I was a person that didn't work for, and there's plenty of people I can tell you right now. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for. And I want to address that, but before I want to say the cool
yeah,
thing she has. Um, did you know, and I didn't know until this woman, the brain gets up to 60% smaller when you sleep. It's incredible. So the brain cells themselves get 60% smaller rather, but the
yeah,
brain gets 20% smaller. And why is it doing this? So she talks about, I'll take her off the screen share real quick.
yeah,
She didn't have as much to say about how to fix it, but this is what she said. Jay talks about slow wave sleep. Why are the slow waves important? So the slow waves are in the delta range. They're associated with deep sleep. And that is one of the reasons Jay tries to do SMR training, or SMR training is done rather, is because it increases those delta waves. Those delta waves have a really cool function I never knew until this woman. So the delta waves, while they're in delta waves, like 2 hertz to 4 hertz, let's say, the brain cells actually shrink, and they're doing it all at the same time, the cortex. So the brain shrinks by as much as 20%, and then it expands again, shrink, expand. And what that does is it creates a pump function. And it's incredibly cool, I think, because what it's doing is that pump function rather, it invites in CSF fluid, cerebral spinal fluid, and that allows the brain to clean itself. And this is one of the best functions of deep sleep, and why it's associated. If you don't get deep sleep, it's associated with a much higher dementia risk. The other thing is our deep sleep declines as we age. There's a statistic out there. It's something like we lose like 1 to 2% of deep sleep for a decade, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this is actually referenced as the main reason that older people do not sleep. It's kind of incredible because they're not getting deep sleep. And then the other thing is the glia that Jay loves to talk about. They do the housekeeping during this deep sleep, and this pump system is what causes it. The other cool thing that I found out, this just came out this week, and everybody thought was funny because Jay had something special to say on Facebook about this one.
yeah, yeah.
This one is about where this fluid that comes into your brain at night drains. One of the places that it drains is through your nose. Um, and I'm trying to get the study to come up real quick. There we go. So I'll share that real quick so people can
Okay.
see it. That was Jay commented on it, and it was pretty classic because, as you know, Jay's probably talked about with your viewers that he had that tumor operation on his
Right.
brain a while ago, and as a result, he has to deal with this brain fluid, and it does drain from his nose. I hope it's not too embarrassing. I mean, he said it on Facebook and he said it on here, and then I asked him just kind of, I was like, is it worse at night? He said, yeah, I do. I have to wipe the pillow when I wake up because that fluid has a job to do. It's in your brain to clear it out. The interesting thing for the people who are kind of science wonks, just so you know, what
Yeah.
that fluid, the way this is really working is during the slow waves, the brain cells go what's called electropositive. And when they do that, they use less bold or they use less blood oxygen. That's an MRI signal of perfusion. So they need less blood when they're electropositive, and that allows space for the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid, to come in. And then as it's pumped in, it's also pumped out, and that clears your brain of plaque. And by the way, to link it back to my first
Yeah.
appearance, 40 hertz brainwave rhythm that we talked about with Li Wei Sai, which I'm going to pull up her company real quick so people can see it.
Sure.
Um, that those activated that rhythm gamma, it activated the glia in her patients, and then at least in the mice, it reduced the levels of amyloid beta plaque, which is and maybe tau. I can't remember which plaques, but it reduced plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's. So very cool stuff, and it all depends on deep sleep. So if you're not getting it, not only are you going to have the short-term effects of reduced attention, but you're more likely to get dementia. And there's even a study I saw in the last week. Our ability to, it's called the glymphatic system. It's glia that clean our brain through the lymph system, the lymphatic system rather. This one doctor said, and I haven't vetted this yet, he said, by the time you're elderly, your function is 10 to 20% of what you were when you were younger. Your cleaning ability. So it seems like both SMR could have a huge impact on this, but so could potentially this treatment around, and I'll just share that article real quick for
Yeah.
people to see. This treatment around, this is Cognito Therapeutics. And there you go. They do it with headphones and with light. So she does it with both because they seem to have maybe subtly different effects. So pretty cool stuff. And again, my UF neurology friend just yesterday, she told me that her boss told her about this technology. So this is real stuff that one day they're going to have to acknowledge the stuff that you and I and Jay has been pioneering in for so long. He's been pioneering. We just lum on to him, I guess.
Anthony, are we done with
Yeah.
your list?
I can go as long as you want. You
No,
know, within reason. So let me
I'm,
know.
I, I'll keep going. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure people know how to get to your Facebook page, your
Yeah,
group.
I got a better way for them. It's
Okay.
they can do me at I've met some, not do me. They can reach me at
Yeah.
excuse my language, at Antonio Ramos. That should take you right to my page.
Okay.
And that's where I share all this stuff. I actually met a really cool clinician through your podcast the other day. They
Okay.
found me on there, and they've already sent me some great materials. Actually, it was a good conversation. They called me this, or not called me, they contacted me this morning, messaged me this morning, and they said, Anthony, I have a patient who has ADHD, and they have been prescribed, they're diagnosed ADHD, they've been prescribed Zoloft or sertraline. They said, is that a good medication for them? And because of Jay and because of Martine Arns and you for hosting them,
Yeah.
I was able to tell her about the Arns paper that Jay talks about. And what the Arns paper said is if they know your alpha peak frequency, they can tell you which depression treatment works the best. And specifically, um, they found out that SSRIs are good for people who have what's called let's say like a normal alpha peak frequency around the 10 hertz range, but also, and this is the paper, Stratified Driven Psychiatry, I'll share real quick,
Okay.
um, by Martine Arns. It was presented at Jay's conference in Sassoon. And basically, I'm not logged in here, so it probably won't show up so great, but people can see the name there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and there's a chart in here. What it says is if you have a normal peak frequency, and Arn said this at your conference, most antidepressants will work better. They'll work, I think, actually still only 50% of the time. However, he said if you have a slow alpha peak frequency, below 10 hertz, let's say, and he has the measurements in the article, and you can get to them from the study.
Got it.
The only antidepressant that worked right was sertraline, so it's Zoloft. So I told her it works well for people who have um, a slower to middle alpha peak frequency. So it could be the right prescription based on what you see when you do the EEG for her. And I sent her the paper. And also, we know Jay's ADHD medication targeting paper, which I do have that one on my computer. That one says there's a phenotype of elevated frontal alpha. That means if the child has, or the person rather, this is the paper, I'll screen share that one too,
Sure.
that allows them to know whether antidepressants will be a right treatment. Believe it or not, for their ADHD, you can use antidepressants to train, or I'm sorry, not train, to improve their ADHD symptoms. And so that sounded like a cool thing to share with her, which I did. I sent her Jay's paper, and conceive at the very least, if that child wants to continue, that family wants to continue with medication, she'll be
Yeah.
able to tell them, hey, listen, Jay says, the EEG says, Nature, one of the top journals that Martin Arns was published in, sertraline is or is not a good medication for the child, depending on what they're, and only we can do that. And that's one of the reasons why my MD friend that I've talked about before, he's puzzled too. He wants to know, why are we not using this well enough enough in our
Yeah.
practice? Because he says there are doctors who would kill, the honest ones, the nice ones, they would kill for something like this. I couldn't get the screen share to work there, but he says, yeah, I mean, I'm sure, doctors, he likes to say, they're in this on some level because they want to deal with people and with customer service. And I
Yeah.
got to think most of them, they don't want their patient to have to try 3 medications, or they don't want them to have to go through extra anguish. So this could help them. So anyway, so that was another topic I was happy to hear
Uh,
about this morning.
Anthony, that
Yeah.
that that was a quick hour. That was a
Oh,
quick
awesome,
hour.
man. I appreciate it.
No,
Yeah.
appreciate you, man. Getting a lot of positive feedback, and
Oh, good.
we'll just try to keep pointing people to your group, and people have comments, put it in there, or give comments on YouTube or whatever, questions. Just two
Yeah.
two guys at the bar sitting down talking mental health, having a
No,
sparkling water.
I appreciate it, man. And if you have feedback for me, I'm willing to incorporate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, I'm honored to be here with you, but also just to talk to people who care about people. I mean, that's
Yeah,
why we do this, I think.
yeah. Hey, life is about feedback, right? So
Yeah,
we
I
need
love
it.
that.
The
I need to
client
start using that. Yeah, go on.
life is all about feedback.
I love
Anthony
it.
Ramos, thank you for another neurofeedback news and notes on the NeuroNoodle podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And good to see you too, Pete.
Go Gators.
Oh, thanks, man. All right, I'll see you.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Mark your calendars for Friday, April 26, 2024, as Bradley University hosts the 8th Annual Super Brain Summit, presented by the Center for Collaborative Brain Research. This year's topic, Rhythms of Regulation, Polyvagal Perspectives, promises an insightful exploration into polyvagal theory with Deb Dana, LCSW, leading the discussions as a featured speaker. Dana is a celebrated author and clinician, brings her extensive knowledge and practical experience to the forefront. The event will be held at the Hayden Clark Alumni Center's Peplo Pavilion, available both live and online, ensuring accessible participation for all interested. For those looking to register or seeking more information, please contact Gwen at GHOWARTER@bradley.edu or by phone at 309-677-3900. Further inquiries about the program can be directed to Dr. Loy Russell Chapin at LAR@bradley.edu. Don't miss this enriching opportunity to engage with the latest advancements in brain research and polyvagal practices.